our programs. So let me back up a little, tell you that I'm Connie Boland. I think I have 3 name tags on, so I should be able to figure out who I am today if I get lost. I am the founder and the executive producer, now is the title they've given me for Warbirds in Review. This is our 25th year. I had no idea. Thank you. And without the team of professionals that we have here, Sleeping Dog Productions, and then a lot of volunteers, our aircraft owners, this would not be possible. Scott's Miracle-Gro company has been our sustaining sponsor. Ron and Diane Fagen of Fagen Fighters World War II Museum provided the building for us behind us, still continue to support us, and there are a host of people that make this happen so that we can record the stories of our heroes, history heroes, and our heritage. That's what we're all about. So thank you for being here, and we see regular people every day come for all of our programs, so we're glad that you enjoy them enough to do that. Today's program will feature the heirs of the Doolittle Raiders. As we carry through history and through modern times, we can continue their legacy by remembering them with different stories, and we record all of these so that for future generations we will continue to remember those who have allowed us to have our freedoms today. So we thank you again for being here, and we have a video that will be on in just a few minutes that will give you a little history about the Doolittle Raiders. I'll have to recognize that the person that will be the moderator today, and who is the moderator for most of the programs this year. You know, a few years ago I asked this gentleman if he would be willing to be the moderator for the program, and in January, I'm a little old for this, but in January, I married Brigadier General retired Ed McElhenney. You know, you got to keep them any way you can. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here, and please watch the video, and again, welcome. Thank you.
right, away we go.
Dad went with, yeah.
Let's go do this.
Follow me. Follow me. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ed Connie's husband. And we are honored here.
Jim.
Please, y'all, just take your seats. Today to have a beautiful B-25 here, and more importantly, to remember those 80 people who in 1942 said, yes, we will. You think about it, and Cindy can correct me. Youngest one was probably 20 years old, is that right?
They were 21. There's 6 that were 21 that year.
6 21-year-olds, okay? You know,
Turned 21.
and they said, hey, we need y'all to go do a mission.
Yeah, but they turned 21.
And
yeah.
they didn't tell them what the mission was. They told them that, hey, it's top secret. And you know what they said? They all said, I will, I do. I'm going to go do it. And they did. And there were 80 of those men who did that. And, you know, out of the 80 men, I got to say, again, I got a good historian over here. 5 of those guys turned into general officers. There were 3 Silver Stars that were given out of that raid. And you know, I look around today and kind of go, you know, how many of us would sit there and go, I do right now? Well, obviously I did for 33 years, but did I have bullets chasing me? I didn't. Did I have, you know, any of that real bad stuff? I said I do, but these guys did it for real. And we're here today to honor them, to remember them, and we've got some great history here with these people that are sitting in front of me. And I got to say, you know, this was a raid that started in 1942, and I think less than a month ago, you know, and this was a secret raid. You know, it was, hey, let's sneak up on Japan, let's drop some bombs, and then go from there. And less than a month ago, I think we kind of did something a little bit similar. We had another secret raid, you know. The bombers were a little bit different, you know. They were called B-2s, and they went out there, and 7 of them put bombs where they needed to be. I'm a former bomb guy too. We used to say warheads on foreheads. Well, that's what those guys did, and they those B7 or B2 guys did somewhat similar, you know. And so it's kind of interesting that, you know, how many years, 80-something years later, you know, we've got a mission like that also. But today, the way things are going to run, I hope, is I'm going to introduce Larry Kelly. He'll introduce the 3 other members on the board here today. We'll talk about some stories. Larry just got back from China, by the way. And was, I'll never forget the picture. I watched some of the pictures they had from when he was there, and there was one where he's pointing like that, and there was no doubt in my mind what he was pointing to, and what he was pointing to was where they ditched that one airplane on the beach out there, and that was Thatcher's airplane.
That was where Jeff's father-in-law actually crash landed as the engineer gunner on crew number 7. I was pointing to the actual spot on the beach where the airplane was dragged up, but right on the spot on the beach where the airplane crashed.
So anyway, this is where we're going to go. We'll do a little bit of a walk around at the very end, and then we'll open it up to questions. But for right now, I'm going to introduce Larry Kelly. His airplane was supposed to be here, Panchito, but he made the command decision of saying, hey, weather is a problem. Hey, it's an old airplane. I need to be here. So he bought an airline ticket. Here he is. I say thank you. And instead, we've got Miss Mitchell, and you can thank, let's see, the owners of Miss Mitchell. Where are they?
Where are you guys? Lauria? Jim. Okay. Jim and Amy Lauria over here. I called them yesterday. We've had tropical weather along the East Coast. We're based in Delaware, and we've had tropical weather now for the last week and a half, pouring down rain every day. Yesterday, we were looking at it early in the morning. I said, we can make it through, but I've got to be through. So I got an airline ticket, and my crew just landed in Findlay, Ohio, cheapest gas in Ohio. When you're on the B-25, you look for cheap gas. So they just landed in Findlay, Ohio. They'll be in here a little later, but I asked Jim, because Jim and Amy Lauria and the CAF have supported every one of the Doodle Raider events that we've planned back at the Air Force Museum. All the CAF airplanes were always there. They always found a way to cover all expenses because they were not getting paid. But who we have here with us today, and thank you, Jim, Amy, y'all just come out here, wave, come out of the shadows. Jim's the man that keeps this airplane flying. He's the engineer, he's the A&P, he's the IA, he's the brains, and now taking a real leadership role in the B-25 community. But the group we have here with us today, we have Jeff Miller here, marine biologist,
Thank
but
you,
his
guys.
father-in-law
Appreciate
was
it.
David Thatcher. So Jeff married into the Doolittle legacy, and we have Cindy Cole Chow. Now, many of you have been here before and saw Warbirds and Review programs we did with her father, Dick Cole, Doolittle's co-pilot. And once Carol Glines died, Cindy sort of assumed the role, and we all thank her for that, of historian, because she maintains details that every time we talk, I find out details that I never knew. And 28 years, I thought I knew a lot, but then I get next to Cindy, and I learn how little I really do know. And Ross Kantenberger here is the grandson of Holstwilder, another one of the Doolittle Raider pilots. So the idea we wanted to talk about was, what was it like, in being in the families, and in Cindy's case, growing up, as a child of a Raider. Speaking of bombers, nothing like being drowned out by a B-29, right? I mean, now you know you've arrived. You're at Oshkosh.
Yeah.
Trying
Okay.
for publicity.
Where do you want to start with, Ed?
Well, let's start first with some of the growing up experiences, if you will. Who was it who said, Jeff, I guess you knew David Thatcher,
I do.
but you knew him as a man. You didn't grow up with him per se. Is that right?
Well, in part, I actually first met Dave Thatcher on the pages of Lawson's book when I was 10 years old.
Wow.
I was living in Hawaii, just above Pearl Harbor, and I read Day of Infamy, Walter Lord's book, and I read 30 Seconds Over Tokyo by Ted Lawson, and that's where I first met Dave.
And Dave, by the way, Dave was a what they call him, a gunner,
Engineer gunner.
engineer gunner on an airplane that ditched right where Larry was. Just
Crew number 7, yeah.
Crew
Okay.
number 7.
Okay.
And David was one of those silver stars. You just imagine, because here he was, not much more than a teenager, and the 4 officers on his airplane were severely injured, and even when ordered to go ahead, leave us, he would not. He continued to administer first aid and take care of these 4 officers, and for that, this young Montanan was awarded the Silver Star.
Yep, and you were actually there, and you saw where they ditched this airplane, and the airplane, you said, flopped upside down. Is that right?
I waded underwater. I mentioned the story here just a little earlier. I had always, just like Jeff, I read 30 Seconds Over Tokyo when I was 9 or 10 years old. I did a book report on it in high school, and so I knew the history, but when I bought a B-25 28 years ago, you become suddenly intimately involved with the Raiders. But I had always thought that he had made trying to land on that beach on Nantian Island, I thought that had to be a foolish thing. But as we arrived there about 3 weeks ago now, onto the beach, and before we went right down to the beach, I'm standing on the hill, a little outcrop, and I'm looking down at the beach, and I said, I'll be damned, I was wrong all these years. It's nearly a mile long. It's about 200 yards wide, hard-packed sand, white beach, just a slight turn to it. And I'm standing there, and I'm looking. I say, well, there's rising terrain over here. There's a mountain over on this end. There's a lower mountain over on this end, and then there's a small island out here. If I was in that situation, the weather that day was exactly the same, rainy, overcast, fog. I would have circled. I would have made a circling approach. I would have come over that little island. I would have been in a turn here trying to hit the earliest part of this beach. And sure enough, the historian that was with us, who spent his lifetime researching Raiders, said that's exactly what they did, and right there is where they hit, right where you were pointing.
Yeah.
And so we went on down on the beach, but it was very logical for me to try to land there. But what happened was he and Davenport were having sort of an argument over whether to ditch in the water or try to land on the beach. But the gear was down. They were on a short approach trying to make a turn into the beach, and the landing gear caught a rogue wave. And the books say they went through the windshield. No, they didn't. They went through the top of the airplane, up through the escape hatch that you see up here. Because when the landing gear hit that wave, the airplane suddenly pitched over like this and went upside down. You know, your father-in-law was confused because he was dazed and trying to get out and couldn't find the escape hatch because the airplane was upside down. You know, and he eventually found the hatch to get out. But yeah, they went in right at that very spot. Mm-hmm. And some people say that's the airframe that was taken to Japan. It was not. When the Japanese left that area, we talked to some of the folks some of the people that was there and still have fragments of the airplane. The airplane was dragged up onto the beach. I don't know how they did it, but the remains was dragged up on the beach, and the local villagers scavenged every part and piece they could off of that airplane. I held in my hand a bowl that had been made from the oxygen tank, been cut in half and hammered down and made into a bowl. Wow. And the old man was going to give it to me until his daughter said, no, we're not giving you that.
All right, Jeff, but tell us about the man you knew.
He was a gardener. He was an honest, fair man. He was calm, self-contained. All sorts of very positive things you can say about him. He did not tell stories of the raid. He did not tell stories of his role. Whenever he talked about the raid, he would answer questions, and then he would stop.
What was his vocation? What did he end up doing for a living?
He ended up being a mailman in Missoula, Montana, and his mail route happened to include his own home, and so he stopped home for lunch virtually every day. And because the school where his children were going was so close, they were home for lunch, and so basically they had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together during the work week when he was out and about. He was a fisherman. Rivers in Montana are famous for their trout, and he enjoyed that. He enjoyed a bit of hunting. He was an everyman in that sense of the word. He was a rural Montanan who grew up, did some extraordinary things, was involved in some extraordinary events, and then went back to continue his life with his family. I never heard him brag about what he did, and whenever he talked about the raid at a public gathering, or even when his son was interviewing him, he always talked as if there were 79 other men standing at his shoulder. Think about some of the people that you've heard tell stories. He very rarely ever used the word I when he was telling a story, unless it was specific about where he was in the aircraft or what specifically happened to him. I honestly can say I never heard him brag. He never embellished. I listened to him tell dozens and dozens of stories at gatherings like this one when he was asked a question, and he would tell the same story the same way. Every now and then he'd add a new little bit of information that I hadn't heard before, but it was in the story. It just wasn't relevant to the previous question. It was relevant to that question, so it would be there, and then he would talk.
Wow.
In talking with him many times around the table playing cribbage. He was a great cribbage player, by the way. If he was a 10, I'm a 1 or maybe a 0.5 cribbage player, but he was a great cribbage player.
Wow.
He did say that as the ruptured duck was coming in to land, when she hit, she stopped very, very quickly because the water was only about waist deep. It wasn't 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet deep. It was very, very shallow, waist deep. And the two motors continued on. It took them right out of their housings. The motors went down the beach. As Larry said, the duck tipped over. The guys went out in a period of, it must have been just 3 heartbeats. I mean, it would not take much time for this whole aircraft at the speed it was going to come on over and land upside down.
Where do you think it was going? Probably 100?
They were, oh, no. They were probably, that's the stall speed.
Okay,
They would have been doing probably around 120 miles per hour indicated.
okay.
Well, actually, Davenport told Lawson that they had just passed slowing down less than 110.
Well,
Just
that's
before they touched.
That's touchdown speed.
That's
yeah.
touchdown. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they had just lost power, just seconds above, because he was expecting to come down and land under power.
Mhm.
And according to the books, the records, the after action reports, they lost power, and so she was basically being a controlled crash.
Okay.
And that's what happened.
And he lost power because he ran out of gas. That
Lost
that
power,
was it.
basically. Yeah.
B-25 with the gear down and flaps down full, and you pull the power, it turns from an airplane to a brick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, as Larry said, the duck went over. The whole front end here concertinaed backward and twisted a little bit against the leading edge of the wing. Okay. Now, we don't know whether it went a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. That was never stated in my presence, and it's not recorded in anything that I have read. But it was the happen chance that the way it hit and bent and all that sort of stuff, that the four guys in the front could actually be exited through the top as it was happening, and they were thrown clear as the plane came over.
Wow.
Think about the odds.
Yeah.
It's an amazing set of events there.
Yep.
They managed to get out of their seats and crawl through the little bit of water was there. Some of these beaches are very, very flat, and they go right up in a nice sort of shallow gradient. They managed to get onto the beach. By the time Dave came to, he was knocked out, by his own words, about 5 minutes. Give him 3 minutes to 7 minutes. That's a pretty severe hit on the head. And he came to. The water's coming through the bottom top of the aircraft, and he had to get himself oriented to understand where he was, what had happened, and then there was the hatch. So he was able to climb out through the hatch, but when he first tried, he still had his parachute on. He still had his helmet on, and he had to stop and take his parachute off to be able to get out. His helmet protected his head so that he only received a pretty massive hit. To knock him out for several minutes, we're talking concussion level hit. But he got out, he jumped into the water, worked his way up to shore, and his 4 crew members were already on shore when he got there. And within a matter of minutes, somebody from the village had come down. From the crash site, the village is up around just a little bit of the extension of the hill. And they were there. They started to react and say, and then they'd point out to the duck, asking whether there was anybody else in there. And so they started communicating sign language. Neither one could speak English or Chinese, and so the story continues.
In that regard, the Chinese, all your dealings with the Chinese in this regard have been very positive, haven't they, Larry?
It's
Everybody, I can
unbelievably,
say.
you know, the Doolittle Raiders are still national heroes in China. And at all of these different sites that we visited while we were filming this documentary that'll be out next month, there are monuments to the Doolittle Raiders. They are now called National Historical, they're national, I forget exactly how the Chinese call it, but they've turned them all into little museums. Right there, right overlooking the beach where the Ruptured Duck crashed, they built a big outdoor memorial about the size of this whole area right here. Huge board with a map of China on it, the crash sites of all the aircraft. They have storyboards all the way around the sides about crew number 7. It's a nice little monument. They got this goofy looking strange early 50s vintage Chinese jet parked there, but it's an airplane. And so, and down in San Min, you know, where the Crew 7 was eventually taken, there's a nice outdoor memorial again with a garden, signboards. Everywhere we went, there are monuments to the Doolittle Raiders. And the entire time I was over there filming this documentary, a lot of people said, well, did they tell you what to say? I said, no, they didn't. We went to the site, they set the stage, and the historian that was with us, a gentleman I just called Chin because I can't pronounce his name, we would just start talking about what happened at that site, what happened with Lawson. We met the son of the little Chinese man that carried McClure up the mountain. You remember in the book they talked about how his feet were dragging? And this man was talking about how his dad talked about it, because McClure was, what, 6'2" or 6'3"? He was a tall man.
He was tall, but he was tall.
Well, his dad was 4'10", and his dad put McClure on his back and drug him up, and that's a hilly terrain over there, drug him up. And it was his mother and his father had just got married that day, and they'd been given a quilt as a wedding gift by his uncle. And his mother, that was their prized possession. Now remember, these are simple Chinese peasant farmers. Their prized possession then, she took that quilt and used that, and that's the quilt they talked about in the book, that they wrapped the Raiders, because they were wet and they were cold and shivering and bleeding. And he remembers his mother and father talking about that bloody blanket that the Raiders had, and of course they kept the blanket, you know, for a while. But you're talking about David. Just mention one quick thing. There was an interview done by the Air Force when we were all there back for the 70th or the 68th, one of the ones. And the interviewer asked Dave, said, how does it feel to be a hero? And he said, not a hero. He said, well, who were the heroes? The heroes were those that didn't come back.
That's right. Yep. Yep. I understand. Back to the Chinese for a second, and Cindy can probably correct me here, but thousands of Chinese were killed, weren't they, for housing and taking care of the Doolittle Raiders while they were over there?
Well,
I mean, the Japanese went after them.
There's a backstory to that. The Japanese, that area that they killed, the 250,000, they were already making a warpath down to the oil in Indonesia, because that's basically, they say the war started because the U.S. cut off the oil to Japan because they don't have natural resources. But that isn't true. I mean, it is true, but what the Japanese had already invaded China 8 years before, and they were already very well entrenched, you know. And plus, the other thing too, if the Japanese hadn't bombed Pearl Harbor, and I know there's questions about it, but there wouldn't be a China today, period, because that's how established the Japanese were. They weren't just along the coast, they were throughout the whole area. So when the Japanese started killing their warpath that they went down, they blamed it on the Raiders. Mm-hmm. But they had no idea that was going to come about. And the Raiders didn't cause it. It was a path they were going to take originally, and they just added that fuel to the fire.
Well, the Japanese were hugely embarrassed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The military was embarrassed. They had promised the Japanese people and the emperor that they could not be attacked. The divine wind protected Japan. And now you got American bombers that actually overflew the emperor's palace. So it was a huge embarrassment. So the Japanese went on a rampage to find the Raiders and capture the Raiders that had come down. And we were in the house of the Hsu family, their historical residence, 600-year-old residence that had been rebuilt. And this one elderly man was only 10 years old at the time. He and his father had escaped up into the mountains when the Japanese came through there. But just because two raiders, True Love and Mansky, had come through their village and were fed a meal and dry their clothes out and dried out. They still had their parachute when they stopped there, and they dried their parachute out, and then they were carried, or they were escorted on down to the next village. The Japanese came through there, and because of that, the entire village was burned. The children were thrown into the wells. His uncles were all bayoneted and are shot. Was going through he had hundreds of years of family history. Going through there about all of his family that was executed by the Japanese when they came through his village. And that story was repeated throughout China. Yeah. The Japanese actually had a germ warfare unit in China as well. And they actually cooked up 60,000 biscuits and injected them with typhoid and paratyphoid. They put cholera into the wells. So the Japanese had a bacteriological warfare going against the Chinese as well. So there were missionaries that went through that area after the the Japanese troops had evacuated that area, a year or so later, and they said it was just desolate. There wasn't a living anything. Cattle, pigs, humans, nothing. Just carcasses laying around dying. Human, animal, everything.
Yep.
Total destruction.
All right, I want to talk. We talked about an airplane that ditched. Let's talk about an airplane that they bailed out of. And Ross, your namesake, he was named after
Ross Wilder.
Okay, co-pilot of number
5.
Okay, and he bailed out, correct?
They bailed out when they back on the Hornet before the launch the night before. They found a fuel leak in the main fuel cell, and it was down like 135 gallons. And so they patched it up, and when they took off, they really didn't know how much fuel that they had, because with the shelling of the Japanese radio ship, the fuel's cut off in general quarters on top. So we're thinking that they use these small 5-gallon containers, put as much fuel in there, and then all the raiders got 10 additional fuel cells, and I believe Scott James in his book Target Tokyo said that there was 13 in plane 5. So they took off, and everybody takes off where Doolittle was so that the wing wouldn't clip the island. Mm-hmm. And so they take off, and everyone was on their own. There's no formation or anything. They would circle around and come back over the deck, and there's a guy holding up a sign saying what the current course heading is. And then from there, they were on their own. So about an hour into the flight, the tail gunner engineer who's in the back goes, Captain Jones, do we have enough fuel to make mainland? And his reply was nope. So they had a horrific headwind going in, and so they did their bombing run, and they kind of got lost. So the map shows that them coming back up and then hitting their targets, and then everyone was supposed to come back out to sea instead of flying over, and they were supposed to head to a lat long coordinates, and then from that coordinate they knew exactly where they were, and they could fly into Chuzhou. Mm-hmm. So McGurl, who's our navigator, and if you ever get a chance to read his report, it was kind of humorous. It ended like bailed out, plane crashed, end of report. So well, anyway, they were flying in. They were 12 hours early, and Chuzhou Airfield, who the Chinese had done a lot of work on to get these heavier bombers in. They thought it was a Japanese raid, so they turned all the lights off, and they had the plane that was supposed to be carrying the transponder, the transponders, crashed the day from that horrible storm that they had to fly through. Mm-hmm. So basically, they circle for a little bit and then go, okay, well, the needles are on empty. We got to ditch this. And so, and there's a map. Who's the Chinese guy that has that map? Jin. Yeah. There's a guy who visited all the crash sites except for the one in Russia, and he found parts of the plane and all. But it has a map site of where everybody jumped out and where the plane crashed. So on plane 5, you see navigator, engineer, bombardier, and then there's about 2 minutes, and then Hoswalder jumped out, and then Davy Jones immediately turned the plane and jumped out, and Davy Jones was also an intelligence officer. He helped plan the targets and all, and I'm sure that he told Hoss that there's train tracks in there. Let's go meet at the train tracks. And so the plane flew for another 70 miles before it crashed in some mountains. So
That's pretty far.
last year, my wife and I we were invited to go visit the dedication of where his parachute landed.
Wow.
And it was very steep. It was very steep. And so he spent the night there on the mountain, and then the next morning there was a gentleman, a Chinese, who found him, and we actually got to meet his son, even though we couldn't communicate very well. But he showed him where the railroad tracks are, and so Hoss and Davy Jones, they walked together on the railroad tracks, and they found one of these little pumper cars, and they didn't know if they're in occupied China or what, so they knew where they came from, so they were going to go to the next town. And when they got to the next town, they found out that it was in friendly territory, but everybody else was in Chuzhou. So they transported them back to Chuzhou, where they met up with all the other raiders.
Wow. All right, let's talk to Cindy for a minute here and talk about your dad. We've been privileged to have him here for many years.
Yeah.
Quite the gentleman. How was it growing up? What kind of stories?
Well, I think because of who General Doolittle was, there were Type A raiders, but all of them kept the motif of they never singled themselves out. They never considered themselves heroes, just like Jeff was saying. And my father's personality was very laid back, so was Dave Thatcher. But they were very happy that they were able to do something for their country when the country needed them. And the Raiders were a cross-section, the beginning of all the cross-sections that happened during World War II. They came from 38 different states. They came from all different kinds of background. These were young kids coming off of the Depression. They were lucky if they were going to be able to sell an apple on the corner. And all of a sudden, they were propelled into pilots and navigators and engineers. I mean, jobs that they never thought that would be available to them. Plus, the Raiders were a little bit older than what happens like a year and a half later when you have B-17s flying over Germany, because those kids, in 41, you had to have 2 years of college to go through any kind of pilot training. And most of your navigators, 99% of the navigators on the airplanes were young men that had gone through pilot training and washed out, and the government wanted to keep them because they had a higher amount of education. So they recontacted them and brought them in as navigators. But in 43, you'll have a whole crew on a B-17, and the oldest guy there is 20 years old, you know. So, but Dad was he was lucky enough to get chosen to come into the real Air Force, the beginning of the Air Force. You had to be invited. But the whole Air Force was loaded with war heroes, whether they were peeling potatoes or whatever, you know. So I asked Dad one time sort of a question like, well, did you ever tell anybody that you were a dual rater? He goes, no, I could have been sitting next to Medal of Honor winner. And because there were so many heroes, and this was a new force. But at home, he never talked about it. We had no memorabilia around the house. We had Flying Tiger memorabilia. We didn't because Dad ended up being left in the CBI, so he ended up flying one of the original Hump pilots, and then also he went back for the first aerial. They got invited. All of the things Dad during World War II is he volunteered, and all of the sergeants would tell the young lieutenants, don't volunteer for anything. And Dad volunteered for 3 pillars that probably make up the Air Force. That just happened because the aerial invasion of Burma was unbelievable. It had the helicopters had never been used. They had everything available to them, you know. And but like I said, we had Flying Tiger memorabilia because Dad, flying the Hump, would fly into the bases that the Flying Tigers had set up. Even though the Flying Tigers ended. The real Flying Tigers ended July of 42. So, but I do remember in about 3rd or 4th grade opening up the history book to look and see if they had the picture of General Doolittle taking off the deck, you know. So it was around, but it wasn't like if you asked him a question, he wouldn't answer it. He'd say, we'll talk about it later, you know. We had to listen, just like you guys listen, to them when somebody else asked them a question. We had to listen and hear the stories that way.
I got to ask Larry for a second. You know, you talked about taking off from the carrier and all that stuff. David Thatcher's airplane was the one that took off without any flaps, and we talked about this before. But Larry, you're the experienced B-25 guy. What did he get really lucky or what? They were supposed to be taken off with flaps off the deck of the carrier, and they did not. But they survived. They flew out of it.
Well, your normal flap setting for takeoff in the B-25 is flap 1 or 10 degrees flaps, and that gives you more lift than drag. But in their situation, they were taken off well below what then was called safe single engine speed. Today we call it VMC, and they were taken off at about 70. I asked your dad one time what speed did they lift off at, and he said, I don't know, I wasn't looking. But they were taken off using full flaps to get the 45 degrees of flaps to get the downwash, which give them additional lift for an extremely short takeoff. That's what Hank Miller had taught them how to do. And so they were taken off in, I think Doolittle got off, 483 feet or something, 469 feet?
They all had the same amount of feet.
Yeah, I know they all had the same amount, but it was less than 500 feet before they had to take off.
He was off the deck before the end of it, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's with full flaps.
Remember now, it was storming.
Yeah.
Well, they were taking water over the bow of the boat.
20 knots on the nose, too, of wind, right? They had 20 knots or so?
Nope.
Probably
No.
closer to 30
Okay.
knots of wind.
The Hornet recorded force 5. The Enterprise recorded force 6.
Okay.
You average those two out, the wind speed across the deck without any movement of the carrier was someplace around about 25 to 30 miles an hour.
Okay.
The carrier, the Hornet, was going at a projected 22 knots. That's about 25 miles an hour.
Okay.
But in force 5, force 6, you're not doing that. You're doing closer to 20 miles an hour.
Okay.
The force level is a measure of the wave height. And just like if you watch 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, you will see that bow come up. And if you watch carefully, every one of the aircraft lift before they get to the end of the bow. That's 424 feet from where the front wheel was. And if you look when they're bringing the planes up, still photographs and also in the real footage on the Hornet, when they bring the planes up, there is a square on the deck of the Hornet. In fact, there's 3 of them, 1 for each wheel. Those were specially painted, and they were then graveled so that the plane had something to sit against its brakes, because they're revving the motors up. These planes are not doing a run up to take off. They are at full throttle, flaps down, and they pop the brakes, and she's moving. So you've got 20 knots on the carrier, you've got 25 knots on the wind.
That's 45 right there.
You've got to get to someplace around about 90. Now, go back for a second. They stripped all of the weight out of the aircraft that they could possibly get out, and then they filled her up with fuel. If you balance the numbers out, they come pretty close to the full weight of the aircraft sitting with a full load of fuel as if nothing had been removed. Okay, so the extra fuel accounted for it. The fact that the ruptured duck was able to go off the end of the deck, and remember, the deck comes up just as the plane is there, and then the deck drops away. As she drops away, she's letting a lot more air in, and the duck drops.
He goes into extreme slow flight.
And then she comes
Maximum
up.
power.
There's a
slow
picture
flight.
of the hands of Poseidon lifting her up. And given that I'm married to Dave's daughter, I'm really grateful that Poseidon was there working for the guys.
Well, so extreme slow flight is how he was able to pull that off.
Yeah.
Obviously,
The
the guy
deck
at
was
the
wet, and the deck was wet, and the prop
Yeah.
wash off a number 6 airplane was causing the airplane to slide with the brakes locked. So Ted Lawson had the brakes locked,
Yep.
but the prop wash was making him slide. So he raised the flaps. And of course, there's some debate here why they didn't put the flaps back down, whether it was they détente for neutral position or whatever, we'll never know.
Yeah.
But the fact was the flaps were raised because they were sliding, but the flaps didn't get put back down. So he wound up taking off flaps up, not even flaps 1, flaps up.
Yeah.
So he immediately right into slow flight as the deck falls away. Because remember, they were flagged off. If it reached the bottom, the flagman would flag them off because they would start coming up as they accelerate. And as the ship came up, then they were going off the end. And people say, if you ever watch the movie Pearl Harbor, forget everything you saw. They took off one at a time, circled back over the deck, as Jeff had mentioned, to check the magnetic compass, because remember, they'd been on this steel ship, and these compasses had all been, and some were really affected by the steel. And they were just checking their compass heading and kept on going. Now, originally, yes, they were supposed to fly in 3 ships, formation, but when they had to take off early, they didn't have enough fuel to form up in formations.
Right.
They all were one on their own.
They weren't
Some-
supposed to fly in formation because the lack of fuel, use
Yeah.
of fuel.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
But
had,
they
to,
did-
they had to get there, get it done, and get on to China.
Some of the raiders did see other raider planes behind them and in front of them, but most of the time they were by themselves. As soon as they left the deck, Dad said that's when he thought, gee, what have we done?
Yeah.
Because there was no there's no radio, because they'd taken that out. They couldn't even communicate between each plane. They could communicate, they couldn't, the engineer gunner in the back could not come to the front of the plane until that bladder had been emptied. So they were isolated.
And you talked about the lightening the load, so to speak. I mean, they removed the tail turret completely, right? And they
There
just
was
put,
no tail
No,
turret
there's
on a
no-
B-20. On the B-25B did not have a
Have a
tail
tail.
turret.
Okay. They talked
they-
about putting broomsticks up there.
What they did
Good.
was, in the B-25B, there was just a plexiglass observation window in the back. That was it. You didn't have that. On the J model right here, you'll see there's like a dome back there where the tail gunner would sit, but the tail gunner position was not in the B models. And it was Ross Greening, I believe it was, came up with the idea to take some wooden dowels, paint them black, and just stick them through, cut 2 holes in the plexiglass and stick them through. They didn't remove the turret. There never was a turret.
Okay.
The only armament on a B model was a twin 50 caliber Bendix turret that was mounted just after the bomb bay in the B, C, and D models. The turret wouldn't move forward until the J models. So it was just after 2 50 caliber guns, And they had this goofy arrangement. I'd like to meet the engineer that came up with they had one 30 caliber machine gun in the nose of the airplane, and they had 3 gimbals. And the bombardier up in the front would have to take the machine gun out of a mount, stick it in the gimbal, clamp it down, add an ammo box, charge the gun, and now the Jap fighter is over here. So he's got to take it out of that gimbal, move it over and put it in this gimbal, reassemble it, put the ammo back on it. Now he's over here. It was absolute dumb arrangement. But only the B models had that, and then later they went with the flexible gun, a 50 caliber mounted in the nose, because a 30 caliber machine gun in air-to-air combat is like trying to put out a house fire with a water pistol. It's just not very effective.
The
So
turret,
later, what?
the turret didn't work either. And
Well,
that's
a lot
the
of them had
reason
problems with the early Bendix
they
turrets.
all
so-
had problems. That's how come Ed Horton was picked right on the deck of the Hornet to fly, because he'd been the only individual that gone to Bendix's school for turrets in Connecticut. And at the last minute, so the pictures of that crew have another man there. It doesn't have Ed Horton. I mean, literally,
Right, there was somebody else
changes
in
were
that
done on the
picture.
deck of the Hornet. And more than one crew had a change. McElroy,
Dave had trouble with his turret.
Yes.
yeah, they all did. They all did.
yeah.
They didn't work. But I don't know if they brought more B-25s into China about maybe August, September of 42, and the Raiders that were left in China, they end up flying B-25s out of Kunming, and Dad was flying fuel into them, and one of the times they were down a pilot or something, and Holstrom comes up to him and says, "Hey, you want to go on a raid?" And Dad said, "Sure." So they hop in the B-25s, and it was the first raid on Hong Kong. And those are the men. The Raiders were just stopping through as they were going on, okay? But the men that got left, the Raiders that got left in China, they're the ones that fought the war for China.
Wow.
So
All right, we're getting close in terms of time. I'll ask Larry, any specifics you want to bring up about the airplane?
Well, I just want to
this
mention
is
a
a
little
G
bit
model, right? You said
this is a J model.
a J model, okay.
Out of the last production of B-25, most of the airplanes that are flying today are B-25 J models or H models. The H and the Js were made simultaneously. The H model had the 75 millimeter cannon mounted in the nose. Notice this seam right here. This seam right here, you can take this off and convert it to a cannon nose, or convert a cannon nose to, from a bombardier's nose like this to a strafer nose. So you can take this off and put a strafer nose on that 850 caliber guns in the front.
Wow.
Now add to that, they also had package guns that could be mounted right here. So you could have up to 4 50 cals on the side, 4 in the nose, 2 in the top turret. So in the later J models, start counting. Okay, you had a total of 13 50 caliber guns on the J models. You had 2 that only occasionally worked on the B models, like the Raiders flew. But the turret on this one, you notice the Bendix turret here is forward of the Bombay. On the B models, the turret was just after the Bombay, just behind it. And the engineer gunner was back there by himself, all by himself. And if you saw 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, where they climbs, Dave Thatcher, the actor that played Dave, was over top of the Bombay, and they carrying on a conversation with the crew. That don't happen in a B-25. We lost radio one day, IMC, flying my airplane, and the only way we could communicate, we could not shout loud enough to communicate. We had to write notes to each other on a knee board, and we're sitting shoulder to shoulder and couldn't hear each other. So that didn't happen. And that crawlway over top of the Bombay, they had put a bladder tank in there with extra fuel. So the B models, if you look at a distance, you say, well, they're about the same, or C and a D model, the later models. But the basic airplane is the same, but they just kept adding more and more and more armament to it. And think about a strafer nose, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 50 caliber guns for strafing. So the B-25 evolved more from a medium bomber, especially in the Pacific, to ground attack as strafer against shipping. There was a 345th Bomb Group, the Air Apaches. They had a mission one time. They came back, one airplane Left engine was feathered. The cowling was all beat to hell. And you can't taxi a B-25 without both engines because the nose wheel is free castering. It's a shopping cart wheel mounted on the front. So they rolled off the end of the runway and used the momentum to get off the runway for the next airplanes to land. The CO come running down in a Jeep. And he said, "What happened to you?" A tall Texan to the pilot. And this story came to me from 3 different members of that group at 3 different times. So at first I didn't believe it. But after it was told to me later on, I've become to believe it. He got out of the airplane, he told his CO, he said, "Well, sir, we hit a bird." I said, "How the hell could a bird do that much damage to an airplane?" He was sitting in a tree. But that story, it may sound funny, but it was true. That's how the B-25 evolved into close air support, much like the A-10 Warthog, is to today.
Which is going to be here Wednesday, by the way.
One of the Raiders, he was enlisted, Bissell, he ends up coming back, and he went through pilot training, and he flies an Air Apache at the end of the war.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So.
I just want to mention one thing, Ed, if you can.
Go.
The folks I was with over in China is filming a document. We filmed a documentary. It's called Beyond the Medals, We Fought Shoulder to Shoulder, and they're watching this right now, live stream. And I want to compliment them because they are absolutely dedicated to only one thing with that documentary, and that's telling the facts and the story, the true story of the Little Tokyo Raiders and the Chinese people and their interactions that happened in 1942.
And we owe them so much for doing what they did.
It's
for
a
these
human
Raiders, too.
story that left me in tears more than one time when I was walking around China and meeting these people. Simple people, they have very little. In our society, we'd say they have nothing. Many of the people we talked to, but they're so proud of that interaction they had with these American pilots, and they were so proud to do what they did. There was a Taoist priest where crew number 15 was hiding in the cave, and the Japanese were right on 65 Japanese soldiers right on their tail. And I climbed down in that cave because I wanted to see what it was like. The cave had caved in. We had to get past where the whole top of the cave had caved in. They said, "Don't do it." And I said, "I'm not coming halfway around the world, not getting in that cave." We got down in that cave, and I sat there and thought about what it was like for these 5 crew members, and I think there were 6 Chinese guerrillas that were with them, that was escorting them, just behind a false wall while the Japanese were beating this Taoist priest, almost beat him to death, but he would not yield until where the Raiders were hiding. And they were far from here to you, from the Japanese beating him almost to death. So when I got to meet his granddaughter after we did the filming, obviously he survived because she was his granddaughter there. She was so proud of him. And after the fact, after the Japanese left that day, and here he was, been beat almost to death, he was still so proud when the Raiders came out of that hiding spot. He was so proud that he did not tell the Japanese. It would have been very easy for him to say they're right there, and that would have been the end of it. But they beat him almost to death. And that kind of story happened throughout China. Simple people who were saving these American heroes.
The Raiders were always within an hour. The Japanese were always, all the crews, General Doolittle included, the Japanese were within an hour of capturing all of them.
And within sight sometimes.
Wow.
And the ones that were captured were given up. And General Doolittle had money to see if they could barter or pay them off, but that didn't work.
Real quick, we're getting close to the end, and I got to say, the youngsters that are out there that may be interested in the Doolittle Raiders, et cetera, there's a scholarship fund out there, and I'm going to turn this over to Cindy real quick,
Well,
and just say, hey, we're remembering this legacy, okay? And in doing that, they've got, I think, 2 scholarships, is that right, that are given out?
Let Cindy talk about the children of Doolittle Raiders here.
The children of the Doolittle Raiders, we were trying to come up with a way to keep a legacy going because we're now in basically the 4th generation from World War II. And, say you had memorabilia around the house, part of it gets split with your kids, then the grandkids, and pretty soon it gets down to the great-grandkids, and there's not even 30 seconds over Tokyo book. So what we did was our scholarship, you have to be related to a Doolittle Raider. Hopefully it will keep the story going through, from here on, because before people knew about it. But now, and we've contacted as many as of the families, and we've also contacted the families of the Raiders. 19 Raiders, out of 80 men, 19 Raiders were killed during World War II, which is a very high attrition rate compared to the whole war. And we've contacted as many families to say, and all you have to do is be related to a Raider. And we've given out probably 30 scholarships, and they range from $2,000, whatever money we raised that year, $2,000 to $3,000. So, but the one that Larry's talking about, the Raiders set up in General Doolittle's name, and that is open to the public.
Yeah, the Doolittle Tokyo Raiders formed their own association, the Doolittle Tokyo Raiders Association, way back in the 50s, wasn't it, Cindy?
64.
64, okay. And the proceeds from their reunions each year used to go to local scholarships. The first reunion I attended, I think the proceeds were going to a children's hospital down in Sarasota.
Yeah, they always did. They always did whatever base or city invited them. The Raiders gave a scholarship. They didn't do it. They gave the money, and then the city or the base got to pick. That's a different kind.
But then they created the James H. Doolittle Scholarship Fund, originally just for aeronautical engineering, as Cindy had told me about just a little while ago. But today, anyone seeking a career in aviation, there are certain specifications. And Kyle, I brought 100 copies of how you apply to that. So if anybody knows anybody or wants to apply for one of the $5,000 scholarships to the James H. Doolittle Scholarship Fund, Kyle here has copies that she can give you. I'll have them later on out of my airplane. My airplane just left Findlay, Ohio on its way here, so I'll have copies out of my airplane all week long. And so we can give them there. I also, in my airplane, is 6 newspapers from that era. Wow. American Bombers here, Tokyo, et cetera,
cool.
that we hope to have here. But I'll have those out of my airplane, and at Miss Mitchell, we'll have those during the week if you want to stop. And also in my backpack in here, I'll have out my airplane fragments from 8 different Doolittle Raider crash sites. One whole afternoon I spent in China was with Chin at his home, where they got totes full of fragments and pieces and parts of airplanes. And we sit there all afternoon, we helped them identify parts and pieces. And I became to find real quickly, it's not like you pictured in magazines, an airplane crash landed and it's laying out here. These airplanes, many of them, disintegrated when they hit. We had a spark plug that was laying separately. Well, that means that cylinder was disintegrated. We have piles and piles of just cooling fins off the cylinder heads, broken pieces of cylinder heads. It takes an awful lot to take a 65-pound cylinder head and tear it into little pieces when it hits the ground. But fortunately, sitting there with Chin, he kept giving me little parts and pieces. And my baggage was limited, so I was able to bring back 8 little Ziploc bags with fragments from airplanes, including airplane number 1.
Wow. All right, I'm going to stop things for right now. I know we're over, but...
can I have just 1 minute?
Go ahead.
Okay.
All right. Hey,
Josh, give me those. Give me those. Connie?
Kyle, don't go away.
Kyle, come here.
Kyle, come here.
Where's Connie? Connie, can you come outside? I know Connie's inside watching all of this.
We hope so. I lost control of her a long time ago.
Okay, let me have the coin.
Okay. Yeah,
Where's
Scott,
Connie?
Scott, find Connie. Well, in the meantime, you can
okay, let me
present this
well,
to
Ed,
Kyle.
you're going to have to substitute for Connie right now.
Okay.
Cindy, you've been here many, many times with us. Jeff, you've been here, and folks, that's the sound of freedom.
Nope.
Well,
He's
anyway,
MIA. Okay. Go ahead. Go
Anyway,
go ahead,
what's
Larry.
that?
No. Go ahead.
Ed will just substitute.
I'll substitute.
I just want to mention Sleeping Dog Productions, which is Kyle and Scott They did a production a number of years ago, Missions That Changed the War, the Doolittle Raid.
Excellent.
And the Raiders were all so fond of that, they actually gave these folks a special award for doing it right.
Yeah, it was very
Okay,
good.
for doing it right. They were committed to it. I remember Scott telling me one time, they didn't care if they lost money on it. They wanted to do it right, and they did. You can still watch it. Just do a Google search, Missions That Changed the War, the Doolittle Raid, and you can watch it. It's an outstanding episode. And then many years to keep the history of the Doolittle Raiders alive, these folks have hosted, have hosted different Warbirds in Review about the Doolittle Raiders. When I was going over to China, I had very little bit of time to prepare, but one thing I wanted to do was to prepare a gift for the Chinese. And so I contacted Melinda, and Melinda said, well, I know somebody in the business. So we had... So in some of the photos you've seen and some of the videos, you'll see we had these commemorative coins made, a very limited production. Melinda, in less than 2 weeks, was able to get these made for us. They arrived 1 hour before I landed in Beijing. And these were the special commemorative coins that we were giving the Chinese survivors that had helped the Raiders back in 1942. And so you two especially should have these. And something else, this is just for you. This is from all the Raider family to you guys who have done so much here and in your productions to preserve the history of the Doolittle Raiders. And there's something else here, Josh. Okay. Bring the other one over. I wasn't smart enough to open these before I got here. Here, Josh has got a knife. This is my son, Josh, who his first trip in the airplane was here when he was 6 years old, sitting in my lap. He flew the airplane all the way from Maryland up here.
Thank you.
I had to do the rudder work for him.
Oh, nice.
Give one of those to Kyle. What we have here, Ed, you had referred to this earlier, me pointing to the crash site of crew number 7. This is pointing on Nantian Island, pointing to the crash site where crew number 7. And this vial has sand, rocks, and seashells from that beach where crew number 7 crashed. The next picture is the Dr. Chen's hospital in Linhai, China, the NZ hospital, which the Chinese now have restored to a beautiful monument to the Doolittle Raiders. And in Ted Lawson's book, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, he talks about sitting on the bed, looking out the window of this lovely garden. So I was sitting in Ted Lawson's bed, the actual bed is still there, and looking at that garden, and afterwards I got out, went out, picked up some little stones, and this is some stones from the garden that Ted Lawson was looking at. And then down at the bottom, that famous picture of 22 Raiders outside the air raid shelter and what was then called Chuchao, now called Quzhou, 13th General Headquarters of Chinese Air Force. This cave they had carved out of the sandstone mountain, and many of the Raiders were protected there up to 10 days. And so after we'd finished the filming there, I gathered up a few stones from that. And so that's what these two, and these are for you all, for all that y'all have done to help preserve the history of the Raiders. Okay.
I'm glad they didn't arrest you and keep you in China for stealing
Thank
part
you.
of the soil.
Dad really
Actually, I
appreciate
actually wonder, was I going to be able to get out of China with all this stuff? I had a suitcase full of rocks and sand. And the Chinese didn't question it when I flew from Quzhou back to Beijing. Not a question. When they checked the baggage going to Beijing back to San Francisco, they didn't question it. I get to San Francisco, my bag just goes out to the side.
I knew about it.
And they opened it up, and he said, "What's this?" And I said, "It's sand. It's dirt." Yeah. And so the security guys looking at it said, "Well, we got to test this and make sure it's not explosives." So they're sticking little probes down in this little Ziploc bag of sand, testing to make sure it's not explosive. And when he finished, he looked at me sort of funny, like I'm some kind of an idiot, which maybe I was at that time. He said, well, you and your dirt have a nice day.
So that was a pretty legitimate question, huh? Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Larry. Now, I don't know if we still have time, but if we could have, do we have time just for some questions? I'm sure we've got some out in the crowd, but yeah, let's do it till we get the hook. Yeah, and I'll open it up to say, okay, who's got some questions out there? Yeah. All right.
Real quick, where is Panchito going to be parked?
Where's Panchito going to be parked? It's going to be on the bomber line out here, okay? You're right out there, all right? All right, other questions? Anybody else? Okay, there's one down low.
Are there, and what's the largest piece of a B-25 left from the China raid?
Oh, where'd the mic go? We lost the mic. Oh,
All right, Cindy, here, I got Cindy's microphone here.
oh, we got it right here.
One of Doolittle's engines has been located. And of course, the original engines had a magnesium case, so a lot of it is gone, but the original engine is there. And they were fairly large fragments, but they were all just bent to hell, what fragments they were. Part of the engine cowlings, some of the structure, but they're totes full of what just looks like gone through a shredder. No large parts at all. Now remember, where these airplanes crashed, these people were very, very, very poor. There in the museum in Cuzot, there are pieces of sheet metal that's got little holes punched in it where they would make strainers and use as spoons. There's all different parts and pieces of airplanes that the Chinese at that time scavenged off of these airplanes and made into cooking utensils and other things. So the airplanes were scavenged to nothing. But in the last 18 years, Chen, who we've been talking about, and his friends, I call him Eugene because I can't pronounce his name, they've spent 18 years with metal detectors excavating these crash sites. And you want to talk about some remote areas? Man, these are some remote areas where they've been excavating, but they'll go up there and camp out and spend days just to raise a piece of metal the size of a quarter. Well, the plane that landed in Russia, we don't have time to get into all of that, but they were ordered to go to Russia to scope out the Russian airfields for future use. Now, they claimed they were running low on fuel, but Nolan Herndon told me at the 60th reunion in Columbia, South Carolina, he showed me a letter from Ski York. Nolan had always professed, we were ordered to go, and Ski York had been sworn to secrecy, obviously. No. Well, Ski York finally wrote Nolan Herndon a letter, and the last paragraph of the letter, he said, Nolan, you were always right. And of course, there's a book just recently came out about crew number 8 that a lot of us within the family had known that for decades, that they were ordered to go to Russia. Of course, they thought they were just going to be able to scope out the airfields, refuel, and fly on to Chongqing. The original plan was to land in Chuchao, refuel, all the airplanes would fly into Chongqing or would be given to the Chinese Air Force. That was the original plan. So they thought they could refuel, go on to Chongqing, give the airplane up with everybody else. But the Russians, they were not at war with Japan, so they had to intern the crew by international law at the time. Russians, they had their hands full of the Germans on the Western Front. They could not have another front with the Japanese at the time. And they had a non-aggression pact at the time, too.
All right, thank you. And we've got one quick one then. This is it. This is the last question.
Larry. Larry, you and I spoke several years ago about Pappy Gunn, the book Undestructible, and the development of the Strafer. You got any comments on that?
Well, you know, Pappy Gunn was an older guy. The reason they called him Pappy. And, you know, his family had been interned by the Japanese in Philippines. And he was quite an engineer. And he had his own little airline going at the time the war broke out. But his idea was, you know, the B-25s are taking a heavy toll early in the war. Because you try to bomb a Japanese ship from, say, 8,000 or 9,000 feet, the captain just looks up and says, okay, he just dropped the bomb, so turn left. And they weren't hitting anything. And the Japanese fighters were chewing them up, big time chewing them up. So Pappy's idea was to, he started with A-20 Havocs. His idea was to make them more heavily armed for strafers. He once started making these modifications to the airplanes over in theater, adding all the extra machine guns. They went back to it in here with a fellow named Jack Fox from North American Aviation. They teamed up together to do all these modifications to A-20s and to B-25s to convert them to low level, because if they were going to be successful against shipping and airfields and stuff, medium altitude bombing wasn't working against the Japanese. They were chewing them up. But when they started converting them to strafers, they could line up. Now, we did the count just before. 14, 50 caliber guns, line them up. 6, 8, 10 airplanes wing abreast. Look at the damage they could do. And they're dropping parafrags as they pass over. Okay, and the waist gunner and the tail gunners are strafing going out. So adding all these extra guns, a lot of which was Pappy guns. The 8-gun nose, the package guns on the side was all Pappy guns doings. And North American Aviation said, no, you can't do that. And he said, well, we've already done it. We've been doing it. And that's when they started making all the modifications to the later models.
All right, thank you. Folks, thanks for being here. And Jeff, thank you so much for keeping the legacy alive. Cindy, same. Ross, thanks for being here. And Larry, hey, keeping flying. That's all I can say. I really do appreciate it. Okay? And just real quick, there's a concert here tonight given by Jim Hagedorn, 6 o'clock. It's free. If y'all want to come back for a concert, 6 o'clock. This afternoon, we got the L-19s, and that starts at 1 o'clock. And we got a former POW on that one. Jim Reeder is going to be here, and Charlie Finch. So that should be a good one, too. Thanks, folks. I appreciate it. We'll see you later.
We were made to feel the joy of each and every blade, between our toes, across our backs, to run over its hills, marvel at its beauty, and find comfort in its stillness. We were made for grass. It's where we battled and celebrated, built monuments, grew families, forged memories, and pushed ourselves farther than ever before. We were made for grass, to care for, nurture, and cultivate. We've always made sure to have a patch of our own, because there's no greater feeling than being on the grass, except leaving it.
On January 17, 1942, Chief of U.S. Army Air Forces Henry H. Hap Arnold assigned the responsibility for one of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's highest military priorities, a payback attack on the Japanese home islands, to one of the most famous aviators in history, Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle. In a mere 66 days, Doolittle had identified the airplanes that could be modified to launch a carrier-based attack some 450 miles from Japan, had assembled the volunteer crews, modified the Mitchell B-25s to give them the range to reach a safe haven in free China after the raid, and accomplished the mapping and charting the crews would require. Now on March 23, 1942, Doolittle assembled the men who had been training for the mission at their training base near Fort Walton Beach, Florida. It was time to fly the planes west to the Sacramento, California Air Depot for final adjustments. As he had before, Doolittle offered any man who wanted to the ability to leave the highly dangerous mission without recrimination. None did.
You don't take off on a mission like this without a light at the end of the tunnel. We all thought that somehow we'd get out of it.
Well, in the training in Florida, we were always flying just above the water all the time, right down over the river valleys and between the trees. And then we head stopped all the way across the United States to Alameda, down as low as we could fly.
Yeah, I think Bill asked me if I would go as his co-pilot, and I said, well, of course.
Somewhere along the line, they interject the thing that it was a suicide mission. I don't think it was any more of a suicide mission than the guys taking off from England, going over to Germany. It was just signs of the times, and that's the way it had to be. And that's the way it was, and that's the way it was accepted.
I'm Gary Sinise, and this is Missions That Changed the War.
To me, lawn service is a scam.
There's no lawn service for you.
Unfortunately, I don't trust them very much because I don't know what they're putting down.
Nobody's going to pay attention to your lawn like you do.
It's the whole point of owning a home is that you maintain your own lawn.
We've taken care of this lawn from day one.
I take pride in it, and when people tell me it looks good, it makes me feel even better.
Do you use a lawn service?
Absolutely not. I have you.
I know what I'm putting down when I put Scott's down. I'm putting down a great product.
STS-27 was my third launch, and it was only the second launch after the Challenger accident. Well, I will never forget, we maneuvered the arm, and Mike Mullane was my arm operator, so he moved the arm over there, and we brought up the television image of the right wing, and I looked at what I was seeing, and I said to myself, we are gonna die.
You know, plants aren't so different from us, are they, Ryan?
Plants need food like people need food.
And that's right, and they do tell us what they need, like this really good organic plant food from Miracle-Gro.
It's just as important as soil, sunlight, and water.
Ryan the philosopher. And you know what this one is telling me? She needs a spicy martharita and a lounge chair by the pool. These peppers look hangry, Ryan. Eat them, don't just stand there. You know, we've started this controversy about whether this is dirt or soil.
Everyone's all up in arms about it.
So what do you call it?
You say dirt, I say soil, you say soil.
When do I say soil? I never say soil.
You just did.
There was a day in 2011 when I'm told I was the highest person on Earth. Literally. On that day, I traveled to the space equivalent altitude of 70,000 feet.
Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
It was a voyage to the edge of infinity. For a few minutes that I will remember for the rest of my life, I stared through the frost formed on the canopy of our aircraft as deeply as I could into forever. I'm Gary Sinise, and this was my high flight.
Thank you so much.
There will be a time on Wednesday when you're the highest person on Earth.
Congratulations on that. Yeah. You got it. That'll be good for the wall. How are you? I'm Gary. Thank you.
We gathered to celebrate a life of relentless evil. And though I gave you a quick death, it was not mercy. It was Ortho Ground Clear Weed and Grass Killer.
Kill 'em all! Ortho Ground Clear kills really fast and for organic gardening. Speed you can trust.
So he comes back in a few minutes with a guy about his age, same size. He says, "Now this is the camp commander." And I said to myself, "Oh yeah, this was Saturday morning." I said, "Oh yeah, these guys were out drinking beer last night." They said, "Oh, we're gonna have some fun with a new guy." He says, he asked, "Will you write your autobiography?" I said, "Nope." He talked in Vietnamese. He says, "He asked you one last time?" I said, "No." He talked to me. He says, "He orders you to write your autobiography." I said, "I take my orders from the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force." He talked a little more in Vietnamese, and he says, "One more time?" I shook my head. And the camp commander looks up in very good English and says, "You will be very sorry." Got up and walked out. 2 or 3 minutes later, this big guy comes in, biggest Vietnamese I saw. And they put me on the ground, pulled my arms back up behind me. I couldn't do it again. My life depended on it. My palms were together behind my neck. I could scratch my neck. And they put Vietnamese handcuffs right there. And they walked out. And I thought, this ain't a big deal. About 5 minutes later, my hands were numb, my arms were numb, and shortly my shoulders were numb, and pretty soon my chest was numb. And it proved, for me at least, the whole point was, we can make you do it. What that sergeant had said. We'll show you that we run this camp. You'll do what we tell you to do. Then that night, when you were asking, this was really my low point. When I ate that meal and realized that I had been broken. And so I went over and leaned up against a wall, just slumped down, and there was one light way over in the corner. And I looked up, and it just kept attracting my attention. And I remember thinking it was like Moses in the burning bush, I guess. And I sat there and I looked at the light, and whether it was a split second or an hour, I can't tell you. But I had an experience of something happened to me, and it was all over. I feel very comfortable, very secure. You're going to live, you're going to get out of this, and you'll go home someday.
We were made for grass, made to feel the joy of each and every blade, between our toes, across our backs, to run over its hills, marvel at its beauty, and find comfort in its stillness. We were made for grass. It's where we battled and celebrated, built monuments, grew families, forged memories, and pushed ourselves farther than ever before. We were made for grass, to care for, nurture, and cultivate. We've always made sure to have a patch of our own, because there's no greater feeling than being on the grass, except leaving it.
On January 17, 1942, Chief of U.S. Army Air Forces Henry H. Hap Arnold assigned the responsibility for one of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's highest military priorities, a payback attack on the Japanese home islands, to one of the most famous aviators in history, Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle. In a mere 66 days, Doolittle had identified the airplanes that could be modified to launch a carrier-based attack some 450 miles from Japan, had assembled the volunteer crews, modified the Mitchell B-25s to give them the range to reach a safe haven in free China after the raid, and accomplished the mapping and charting the crews would require. Now on March 23, 1942, Doolittle assembled the men who had been training for the mission at their training base near Fort Walton Beach, Florida. It was time to fly the planes west to the Sacramento, California Air Depot for final adjustments. As he had before, Doolittle offered any man who wanted to the ability to leave the highly dangerous mission without recrimination. None did.
You don't take off on a mission like this without a light at the end of the tunnel. We all thought that somehow we'd get out of it.
Well, in the training in Florida, we were always flying just above the water all the time, right down over the river valleys and between the trees. And then we head stopped all the way across the United States to Alameda, down as low as we could fly.
Yeah, I think Bill asked me if I would go as his co-pilot, and I said, well, of course.
Somewhere along the line, they interject the thing that it was a suicide mission. I don't think it was any more of a suicide mission than the guys taking off from England, going over to Germany. It was just signs of the times, and that's the way it had to be. And that's the way it was, and that's the way it was accepted.
I'm Gary Sinise, and this is Missions That Changed the War.
To me, lawn service is a scam.
There's no lawn service for you.
Unfortunately, I don't trust them very much because I don't know what they're putting down.
Nobody's going to pay attention to your lawn like you do.
It's the whole point of owning a home is that you maintain your own lawn.
We've taken care of this lawn from day one.
I take pride in it, and when people tell me it looks good, it makes me feel even better.
Do you use a lawn service?
Absolutely not. I have you.
I know what I'm putting down when I put Scott's down. I'm putting down a great product.
STS-27 was my third launch, and it was only the second launch after the Challenger accident. Well, I will never forget, we maneuvered the arm, and Mike Mullane was my arm operator, so he moved the arm over there, and we brought up the television image of the right wing, and I looked at what I was seeing, and I said to myself, we are gonna die.
You know, plants aren't so different from us, are they, Ryan?
plants need food like people need food.
And that's right, and they do tell us what they need, like this really good organic plant food from Miracle-Gro.
It's just as important as soil, sunlight, and water.
Ryan the philosopher. And you know what this one is telling me? She needs a spicy martharita and a lounge chair by the pool. These peppers look hangry, Ryan. Feed them, don't just stand there. You know, we've started this controversy about whether this is dirt or soil.
Everyone's all up in arms about it.
So what do you call it?
You say dirt, I say soil, you say soil.
When do I say soil? I never say soil.
You just did.
There was a day in 2011 when I'm told I was the highest person on Earth. Literally. On that day, I traveled to the space equivalent altitude of 70,000 feet.
Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
It was a voyage to the edge of infinity. For a few minutes that I will remember for the rest of my life, I stared through the frost formed on the canopy of our aircraft as deeply as I could into forever. I'm Gary Sinise, and this was my high flight.
Thank you so much.
There will be a time on Wednesday when you're the highest person on Earth.
Congratulations on that. Yeah. You got it. That'll be good for the wall. How are you? I'm Gary. Thank you.
We gather to celebrate a life of relentless evil, and though I
So he comes back in a few minutes with a guy about his age, same size. He says, now this is the camp commander. And I said to myself, oh yeah, this was Saturday morning. I said, oh yeah, these guys were out drinking beer last night. They said, oh, we're going to have some fun with a new guy. He asked, will you write your autobiography? I said, nope. He talked in Vietnamese. He says, he asked you one last time? I said, no. He talked to me. He says, he orders you to write your autobiography. I said, I take my orders from the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. He talked a little more in Vietnamese, and he says, one more time? I shook my head. And the camp commander looks up in very good English and says, you will be very sorry. Got up and walked out. 2 or 3 minutes later, this big guy comes in, biggest Vietnamese I saw. And they put me on the ground, pulled my arms back up behind me. I couldn't do it again. My life depended on it. My palms were together behind my neck. I could scratch my neck. And they put Vietnamese handcuffs right there. And they walked out. And I thought, this ain't a big deal. About 5 minutes later, my hands were numb, my arms were numb, and shortly my shoulders were numb, and pretty soon my chest was numb. And it proved, for me at least, the whole point was, we can make you do it. What that sergeant had said. We'll show you that we run this camp. You'll do what we tell you to do. Then that night, when you were asking, this was really my low point. When I ate that meal and realized that I had been broken. And so I went over and leaned up against a wall, just slumped down, and there was one light way over in the corner. And I looked up, and it just kept attracting my attention. And I remember thinking it was like Moses in the burning bush, I guess. And I sat there and I looked at the light. And whether it was a split second or an hour, I can't tell you. But I had an experience of something happened to me, and it was all over. I feel very comfortable, very secure. You're going to live, you're going to get out of this, and you'll go home someday.